So John, it is always an extraordinary thrill for me to speak to you. I always feel like I am privileged to get any access to your time. Now, I'm always in awe of you because of our relationship. First of all, I know you're really busy with what's coming up, which we'll talk to at the end about the end of this, and I really appreciate your time. All right.
Great to see you.
So what I'd kind of like for the guys that get hold of this or see it or hear it is I'd like them to get a story and a message from someone who has achieved an extraordinary amount of things throughout their career and their life. And because I keep off the back of this today, mental crazy day, I've just run in here. I've just been teaching 16, whatever they're called now. They were VTs in our day, but I think they're DFTs or something else now. But they're first year qualified dentists, just at the end of their first year of qualification. They're all 23, which is fascinating. And you're trying to say to them, if I snap my fingers, you'll be 50. Like me, I was sat there a minute ago. And that's what we feel like, and they don't appreciate that. But they were desperate to share lessons and experiences of things that have happened to me in the last 27 years. And first of all, if you can just do the relatively short potted history of the Ayrshire upbringing for you and your brother, I think it wasn't it, who both have become extraordinarily successful.
That's great to see. Thanks for the invitation to be with you. It's great. And similarly, I do in high esteem as a student that I taught and has gone on to achieve wonderful and remarkable things. So it's a two-way street for me to sit with you tonight. So I grew up in Kilmarn in Ayrshire. Kilmarnock do have a football team, just in case anyone was wondering whether that's the same Kilmarnock, but we'll call them Kilmarnock FC, just in case you didn't realise that they do actually have a football team. But one of my problems was that I was an Ayr United supporter. My father was a lifelong season ticket holder for Ayr United at Somerset Park. So growing up in Kilmarnock, I was forced familially to be an Ayr United supporter. So I got my head kicked in on a regular basis in Kilmarnock because I was an Ayr United supporter. And I think it probably created in me some degree of resilience. But I grew up in a big council estate in Kilmarnock, a new council estate. We were the first people to occupy our house. We'd moved from the central belt of Scotland, from Cumbernauld down to Kilmarnock. My father was made redundant and was seeking employment. So we moved, my brother and myself and my mum and dad, to Kilmarnock, to this big sprawling new housing estate. It was a remarkable new experience because although it was a housing estate, there were green fields and trees and other things round about. And so I started to explore the Ayrshire countryside and developed a real love for the great outdoors, for nature, for birds, ornithology in particular, something that I still have a total passion for. And then I went to a large comprehensive school, both primary and secondary, and had an interesting experience educationally in a school where there were lots of social challenges and lots of difficulties. And yet my brother and I seemed to leave with a decent collection of hires, and he went off to university to do commercial stuff and business. And I nearly did languages. I did 6 year studies French and still have a total love for French language and for French history, French art. And I might even end up my life living in a little place in the south of France. I don't know. That decision's yet to be made. And then I went off to university and did, first of all, dentistry in Glasgow. And then I decided, because I was inspired by a number of individuals at dental school in this new subject of oral medicine, that I would go off and then do medicine. So as a qualified person, came back into a lecturing post in Glasgow, having done some basic house jobs in medicine in Glasgow, and then did my PhD. And then at the same time did my higher training in oral medicine and became a lecturer, senior lecturer in Glasgow, and then headed to various other institutions. I think I'm the only person in Scotland that has actually worked in all 4 dental schools in Scotland, not simultaneously, but at various times. And that's been a great journey. And my greatest privilege, of course, and this very sincerely, has been to, in some way, I hope, positively influence a number of generations of dental students. And that's a very special job. That's a very special role, and I've loved every second.
If the end of Schindler's List, which I'm sure you've seen, the movie, when they put the rocks down.
Yes, yes.
So if there were a Gibsons List movie, the pile of rocks would be enormous. And you don't appreciate that, but you whenever you travel, and so you're on the wall of our teaching bit in the practice at our Hall of Fame. Whenever people see that, they go, "Oh my God, let me tell you a story about John Gibson. He did this for me. He taught me this. He did that." It happens all the time, and that has to be when you reach a stage in your career and in your life when you're comfortable and you don't have to worry about where your breakfast is coming from and that kind of stuff, it has to be one of the most extraordinary privileges to have, of having achieved that for anybody. Privilege is the wrong word, but the rewards for the things that you did the right way. And it's quite an extraordinary effect. It really is. You're like the Pied Piper. I'm interested into who the people, because I'm quite interested in neuromedicine, Johnny. I was explaining that to the guys I was talking to today. And I'm interested in who inspired you and why.
So a number of people inspired me early on, and probably the major inspiring figure in my life was actually Professor Sir David Mason, who sadly passed away earlier this year. David Mason was a remarkable man, and he achieved all the firsts. So he was the Dean of a dental school. He was the Dean in Glasgow when I was a student. He was the Dean of a Faculty of Dentistry in a Royal College, the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Glasgow. And then he went on to be the President of the General Dental Council. As well as that, he was one of the first, if not the first, chairs of oral medicine in the United Kingdom and indeed internationally. And he was just a decent man. And we used to laugh together because he said to me, I was a student rep on the education committee in Glasgow in years 3, 4 and 5. And he would turn up for a staff student liaison committee meeting and he would be chairing it. And you would just have a chat with him at the start. What do you plan to do? And I said, I want your job. And we would laugh about that. And he said, we'll need to learn to play golf, because David Mason was a scratch golfer at one point. And it's one of the things that I haven't done in life is learn to play golf. Because I'm not actually a very good sportsman, truth be told.
Golf's not a sport, it's okay.
A pastime. It's like dart. That's a number of people have turned off the Campbell Academy.
We're recording this on the 9th. It's a very topical conversation with what's going on with Live Golf and the Saudi Arabian Investment Fund. But we'll not touch on that in this podcast. It's a different podcast.
So David Mason was an inspiration. And then Philip Lamy was the senior lecturer in oral medicine in Glasgow at the time. And Philip really inspired me. Philip is one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of medicine and oral medicine. And he was brilliant with patients, absolutely brilliant with patients. And I learned so much from working with him. So those two individuals are the people who really inspired me.
Interesting? Oh, I'm sorry. But what's interesting about when we return back to that in our own careers and we look at people and we say, which ones are the ones? There's so many people that seem to manage to have a grasp to be brilliant across the board. Phil Lamy was brilliant across the board at whatever he seemed to turn his hand to. He wrote some poetry, didn't he? There's so many of these guys who at that stage who were leading the sort of renaissance of the development of dentistry as a profession, really, moving it really on as custodians of the profession, who were utterly magnificent, weren't they?
It's a great point, Colin, because I think one of the things that dentistry is lacking at the moment is that we've become a bit grey. And I would love to see us in dentistry to come again with these polyfunctional individuals, polymaths, individuals that are just fantastic at so many things, because they are, by design, inspirational, whether it's music.
Why? Well, this is great, because this is the type of thing that I wanted to get into. Because the problem is now, as you speak to the guys today and you say, who inspires you? And they say, don't really know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you can see that, and you can see, so the question we asked these guys this morning is, what do you want to do when you grow up? And you're going, Jesus, you've got the keys to the kingdom. You're sat here, you're 23, you're so fit and healthy, you're so intelligent, you're so beautiful, you just take the world by the horns. But they seem lacking in people to direct them in a way that maybe we had, because I had the John Gibson. So whatever inspiration you gained from David Mason and Phil Lamy, you distilled down and bottled down into this massive Class A drug of inspiration that you were able to sprinkle round dental school so that everybody would go, oh my God, I want to be like him. I want to do oral medicine. We all want to be oral physicians, because if we're oral physicians, we can be a bit like John Gibson. You would have been, yesterday, Tuesday, you're so proud of me, honestly. I had a patient referred for facial pain. And I don't tell anybody that I have a little tiny niche interest in facial pain, because you don't want that to be known.
I think you just told everyone, Colin. I think that's it.
But I did a John Gibson. I tell the nurses I'm working with, this is a John Gibson consultation. Let's get a patient in. It's not difficult. But it's not difficult because you inspired me to show me how to do that. And so my fear is that I see you and one or two other people who I hold in really high regard, and they're all going and gone, and I don't see who's next. I don't see them. I don't see who's leading the associations or the colleges, and I don't see these guys as being guys who see that their job as the custodian of the profession.
But hang on a wee minute, because there's an important point here, isn't there? And that is that maybe the issue is that the individuals in the generation beyond me have got their work-life balance sorted out, because to do the things that I did in my professional life, I worked 16 hours a day sometimes to do it. And I do wonder if our expectations are driven by a past epoch, and that the new folks, and maybe perhaps rightly, are saying the professional aspects are fine, but actually there are other bits of life. I've got family, I've got cycling, I've got golf, I've got whatever it might be. And so I do wonder if, because we certainly we're still getting unbelievably bright people into dentistry. I mean, they are the brightest of bright people. But I sometimes wonder if that's part of the danger of dentistry, because dentistry at the end of the day is a practical skill. Yes, there is the art of dentistry, which is the interpersonal stuff and the ability to take a fantastic history from a patient and just get on the level with them. So there's the art of doing it. But there's also the science and the practical skill of doing it as well. And for the most part, and let's not fool ourselves, for the most part, dentistry is a practical skill. And therefore, I think we're bringing incredibly bright people in, teaching them some practical skills, and then saying, there you go, and they're saying a bit bored, really.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. What's interesting, though, is that my wife is a nurse, and nursing has changed dramatically, where it has these extraordinarily bright people who've got degrees and masters, but they can't make a bed. Right? And they don't see care for a patient. And so the world has developed, hasn't it, to the point where people want to be, if you take the bright people and they're very bright and you give them the really bright jobs to do, if they're developing this, developing that, they don't really want to care for people because that takes too long. And that's low level. Do you know what I mean? And so it takes rare individuals who actually thrive on that interpersonal reaction. You see an atypical facial pain patient, A, as a fellow human in distress, and B, as a fantastic intellectual puzzle to solve, then you've won, haven't you? Because you're getting stimulated while you're helping somebody. If the job that you're doing is not another one of those things to do, and it is difficult, but it's I guess if we are responsible for seeking out inspiration too. And the ones that are left are saying, actually, where are the good guys? We have to find them and we have to boost them up and say, you're great. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? And I get the work-life balance thing, but I don't see a lot of dentists with a balance.
Yeah.
So I don't see that. I see a lot. I think, in truth, what I think is the dentists wanted more and more money. And so they work on the fee earning things like the law. Okay. And so the stuff that's not fair, and they don't see it, consciously or unconsciously, and it's not a dig at people, but it's just a case of you don't get paid for that, or you don't get paid very much. And I think that became a real big thing that directed people away. I think before, people were happy with that salary level that they were getting, however they got it, and they had time to do other things. Yeah. And there's less of that.
But take your atypical facial pain patient into the payment structure within the National Health Service anywhere in the United Kingdom, and it's a nightmare.
Not getting treated. They're not getting treated. But well, for goodness sake, if we end up in any way going politically down that route in this, we're done for the whole podcast. So I'm going to deflect you off that and straight into when we met. Okay, so we've had your history of your career, which was then interrupted by a Wazak in 1993, who returned from his elective study in Dallas, chronically unwell, and met his girlfriend at the time, who said, and it was in the middle of the holidays, really, the people were doing their elective, fourth year students were doing their electives in the uni and everybody was off. And I arrived back with swimmer's ear and an ear infection from drinking too much on my elective. And she said, oh, you have to see this guy, John, you have to go and see this guy, John Gibson, he's fantastic, everybody's talking about him. And so I just turned up and went like, the classic and broke and fixed me. And that's how I first met you, was in that circumstance. And that's happened to me on a couple of occasions. I can name one other one particularly, but where I've met somebody for the first time and I've thought, fuck, they're good. As an interpersonal healthcare professional, McCall Dunstan, one of my really great friends who works with me now, treated me first as a physio. And I met him when I was in distress and I thought, I want to be like you. And I met a dentist in Italy in a very sad circumstances for me when my son broke his tooth, but I'd lost one of my friends and I was a mess. And this young dentist, I wanted to be him. He was so magnificent. And you were like that. And so we shared a time at Glasgow together where I went through final year, as you were one of my teachers and mentors, and then I joined the staff as a house officer, and I did the oral medicine job, and we had some fun in that. I did.
I certainly did. We had some great laughs.
You were doing your PhD upstairs, and Damien Petrucci and I, a friend of mine, were studying for a respectively second FDS, and I was studying for first primary FDS every night of the week, weren't we? And none of us had any work-life balance, but we ate a lot of Chinese, allegedly Chinese food. And so that then that sort of the sort of bonds were made of people that just got on. And I made some horrendous mistakes in oral medicine, most notably what we'll call the formalin incident, which we might come back to later.
Please don't.
But I was looked after, and I remember an incident where I had a patient in who was eating, poor old soul, who brought some scones and crumpets. I don't know if you remember that. And
I remember, I talk about it all the time.
And I ended up in a cupboard, tears streaming down my face, crying, and then was told off by Damien, who was my SHO, because David Felix, the consultant, would go mental. And then Damien came in and saw, and he was crying in the cupboard. And then you were in, and then we got roasted by David Felix, and then he was in, and then the four of us were in the cupboard because it was just so comical. And so I think people who haven't worked in a hospital environment like that and gone to the surgical jobs and all that stuff, it's like The House of God by Samuel Shem, that book that everybody had to read. This is going to hurt. It's like all of that culture. It's like a war zone at times. It feels like everybody's on the same team.
But can I stop you there for a moment? Because what you have just described there is very much the educational apprenticeship model, which is something I absolutely endorse. So some of the best conversations that we would have had and some of the best handing over of information to you would have been when we were eating Chinese food or when we were having coffee in the canteen. So the apprenticeship model means that you spend not 24/7, but you spend your working time and some time beyond that with this group of experiencing individuals.
With your firm,
Correct, absolutely. And we don't do that anymore. And I think that's one of the great losses.
We have tried to replicate that model in our work. We have an MDT on a Tuesday. We have this group, this camaraderie of junior to senior clinicians in the practice. And it's so special because otherwise dentistry is isolated. But we had that, we worked together for that period. And then I went on my merry way to England. And you then continued in Glasgow and worked your way through, finished your PhD, and then moved on. But through various highlights of your career, the two other things I wanted to pick out were, so you ended up latterly one of the chairs of conduct.
I'm glad you clarified that.
Not like me. No, yeah.
There's another story.
Not like me in my stripy uniform with my number on my chest. So to see you in that role through what was a difficult time with the GDC, let's be clear, was at least reassuring, and to know that, because I know your personality and your ethos, but that was a whole challenging time with the GDC, but extraordinary work experience, extraordinary life experience for you, I guess.
Fantastic, absolutely. I look back on the 10 years at the General Dental Council in fitness to practice as being one of my pivotal learning times, and it actually gave me real insight into the issues that dentists face in practice, real insight into some of the problems that dentists face and staff beyond dentists, nursing staff and hygienists and therapists and technicians, because it's tough working in the dental team. It's not an easy job. And so I got some insight because I was this academic that worked in an ivory tower and hadn't been in general dental practice for many years. I was at one point, but hadn't been for many years. And just hearing the stories and understanding the stories, fascinating. And it developed in me a real sense of empathy for the profession and some anger as well, because we have some individuals in the profession who persistently do things very badly and very wrongly. They're not big in number, but they are there, and we sometimes have to pick ourselves up and say, son, you can do better. You have to do better. So yeah, a real learning experience, and seeing the vast panoply of professional life across all aspects of the dental team. And
from that, not immediately from that, but because of the experience of that and obviously the rest of the things you'd done, you were then invited to join, dental protection and MPS effectively, because you chaired the dental protection and the board of MPS.
I did, yep.
And so that is an extraordinary level of leadership and an extraordinarily wealthy and powerful organization, isn't it?
Yes, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, dental indemnity organizations, or medical indemnity and dental indemnity organizations across the world and hugely influential. Yeah.
Yeah, and you enjoyed that?
I did. I learnt a huge amount from my time there, and I learnt about the commercial side of things as well.
Yeah.
And making sure that books balanced at the end of the day. And again, seeing the difficulties that doctors and dentists got themselves into, and also started to understand in a way that I had picked up at the General Dental how much the system is influential in either augmenting problems or dissipating problems. And that's for a whole other podcast, because we have institutional difficulties, but we have difficulties at every level within the organizations that we work in. And seeing how they play out and how individuals interplay with those organizations and with systems is a fascinating study.
So you would come to us, and when we run our business teaching, you would do leadership stuff with us, which we will do again. And that was leadership at its purest, because it's what dentists find, and lots of dentists that retain a clinical practice of any kind, and myself as well, and my organization is tiny, but if a leadership often exists in the abstract. It exists detached from the end user, and in a way has to do that, because you have to have a clarity away from that. It's fine to dip in and out of that, but the problem I suppose we have is that I'm face to face with the end user 2 days a week, and so if I go into work to do a leadership day, you go, well, so's got a problem, can you see them? But you were able to have that situation where you existed in terms of the DPS thing, and on your sections you were with DPS, like in a true strategic leadership level, which is a fascinating place to live, isn't it?
It is, but one of the dangers is that you move of your own volition to a place of operationalization instead of being purely strategic. And if I'm perfectly honest, one of the greatest dangers of leader, and I'm not talking about leaders in dentistry, but across the whole board, is this failure to separate strategic intent from operationalization. And we tend to get drawn in, because we're practical people, we're dentists, we tend to get drawn into the operationalization side of things. And that's the danger. You weaken your strategic input when you get pulled into operation.
Yes, we've done a lot of very sophisticated work on that, despite how small we are. And I've been instructed and told exactly what my role is when I'm non-clinical by my team. They're very clever people, which is culture and vision and that type of stuff. But we do a 360 appraisal process. So my 360 appraisal process, I was really proud. I was really proud of, except the fact that people said, just for feck's sake, stop solving other people's problems. Because it's hard to walk around the thing that you created and go, sorry, I'll grab that. But that weakens your part of that role that you have, doesn't it? It does. And it is very difficult to do the head-on, head-off thing, but that is in fact the job. You have to do that, and you have to say, today I'm not doing that. And it gets stronger and better for that. But that type of insight, because there are dentists who don't want to run an organization, they want to be dentists clinically, and that's fabulous. And they're so wonderful and useful and helpful. But there are other guys who want to build an organization, but they often think that because they're a dentist who's good at dentistry, they therefore have the ability to build an organization, which is absolutely irrelevant to the actually having the ability to do that, isn't it? Which is fascinating. Yeah. Okay, so this is fantastic and really insightful stuff for people who are interested in this, and also interested in who John Gibson actually is, because the danger coming up, isn't it, is that John Gibson will be one man walking, and that people won't actually realize that the extraordinary difference that you're making and going to make now in that sphere, which we'll finish on in a minute or two, it comes after the extraordinary influence that you've already had prior to that project. All right. And I'm keen that's publicly seen and acknowledged. I'm also keen that it's acknowledged by you, because your influence, it's that wonderful situation that's the pebbles and the ripples, and that they continue to ripple. And so much of if I'm able to influence anybody positively, whether it's a patient or a delegate at our academy, is because of the work that you did and that I saw from you. We had a fascinating interchange, which I'm sure, I certainly hope you don't remember, but I saw a patient in the clinic in Glasgow, a facial pain patient, a lady, mid-40s, I would imagine. And I said to her, I must have learned this from you, but for some reason you were observing or watching or seeing what I was doing. And I did say to her, was there anything that happened around the onset of this pain in your life which was not very nice that you could attribute to perhaps being influential in starting this? And she said, no, nothing. I said, okay, are you sure? And she said, well, actually, there is. It was this. And it was, I think, a separation from her husband or something like that. And afterwards, you said to me, never, ever lose the ability to elicit that secondary thing from someone. So we have a thing that we do at work, which we've developed, which is based around that, which we talk about. In fact, if I'm still allowed to come to Glasgow in November, which we'll talk about at the end of this, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. And we say, are you okay? And people say yes. And we say, are you sure you're okay? And they say, no, I'm not. And that's Billy Connolly when he comes out of the shop in America and they say, have a nice day, you're welcome. And he says, have a nice day, shows your willy, you're welcome, because I'm not listening. But you break through that with the secondary thing, don't you? And if that was all that I ever learned from you, and it wasn't, that has been used 100 billion times to help people.
Yeah, but let's cut to the chase, and that is that the most exciting thing that you can possibly do as a clinician is bring the patient into that safe space and unpack what it is that lies behind their issue or the problem. And I am very old now. I never fail to be absolutely blown away at the end of every clinic as I reflect on the consultations taking place, that an individual can walk in off the street, never having met me or anyone else before, sit down, and within 3 minutes, we're talking about, for them, some of the most potent and intimate things that they could ever talk about. And it's with a total stranger.
Yeah.
And for me, bringing the student into that consultation and just opening up that moment, that special moment, the chemistry just right in the room, and it can genuinely be career transforming.
The circumstance we find ourselves in now, I'm a Seth Godin devotee, writes a blog every day, has done for 10,000 blogs. He pretends to be a marketer, but he's a social philosopher. He's brilliant. I've actually met him once, but his blog today, it's like he's writing for me every day. And his blog today was about the fact basically that if you've learned all that information, that's not clever, because I can find it in 30 seconds on my phone. And all of this stuff that you thought was clever isn't clever anymore. The thing that's clever is humanity, is that. This is what we say to the guys today, right? Doing the dentistry isn't clever. There's a billion courses to teach you how to do that. As long as you've not got 10 bananas for fingers, you can just about get. But what you need now is to be human, because we're dehumanizing almost every aspect of society, which again is for November. So we need to rehumanize part of society, and we get the chance to do that. And that's where, if you want to be a ludicrously successful dentist in any field, but particularly if you're in a situation where you're asking people to pay for their treatment, and you spend some time doing that unpacking thing with people and saying, no, the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I don't want to talk about dentistry. I want to find out who you are. I think if we can teach these guys the value of that, and that is a learnable skill, isn't it? Then we can go on from
it. Is a learnable skill, and I learned it from a physician that was one of my senior consultants at Glasgow Royal Infirmary. And I was really stressed at the number of alcoholics coming into the ward. I said, we're going to do something about this. And he said, away and sit down in the bed with them, one of them, John, and just have a chat and make it a two-way street. And it was fantastic. It was a great piece of advice. So you start every consultation a two-way street of who you are and who the patient is. And it's a remarkable settling of them into the clinical environment, and it opens up trust between you and them.
It's just marvelous. It just makes your job lovely.
It's not rocket science, is it?
No. Okay. So to finish with, as part one of this, we want to keep this. We could speak to you forever, but we obviously, the elephant in the room is the project that's ongoing at the present time. Okay. And so as a result of the terrible events that your family has suffered and the loss of Cameron, okay, we have a wee walk to do, which is starting Monday.
Yep, 13th of June.
And it's about 1,000 miles or so.
1,200, don't listen.
By the time you get to the last 200, you'll not be able to feel it. And we're going to put all of the stuff around this. I'm going to get a donation to the Canmore Trust and the story about the Canmore Trust and the loss of Cameron and where you're going to next in your survivorship journey. I'm going to meet up with you somewhere near on the second Wednesday in July, and I'm going to bring a little portable device probably, and we'll just do a little thing, chat to you, and perhaps both of you if we can, and just have a chat more deeply about what's going on in the middle of it and what happens from that. And whatever goes out with this will be a little description of all of that stuff, okay, so everybody knows it. So I don't want to go into just in detail for the minute for you, because we're just on a different subject. I'm not downplaying it in any way, obviously. But you also, as one of your projects, you have an event in November, which is a dental wellbeing event. So there are clearly different strands coming out from this, aren't there? Because there is clearly the survivorship of people, families who are living with the aftermath of suicide events. Yeah. And there are prevention and aspects of prevention associated with it. And there is clearly with this event a well-being aspect of things, in the hope that to create a better environment, less people are likely to go down the road of suicide, which I imagine it's where we are. Yeah. So that just because I'm interested in the day because it's a dental wellbeing day, and I've even had someone asking me if they can come. I've also had a company asking if they're allowed to sponsor it. And they're a very big, wealthy company. So I'll need to give you the details. But tell me about that day.
So that day really bounced out for me from the whole lockdown and the brokenness of the dental profession following lockdown, and people trying to keep businesses afloat, trying to keep practices afloat, trying to care for patients when they were prevented from caring for patients. Really difficult. And I, during that time, had a number of conversations through the Canmore Trust and through personal contacts of people who were suicidal in the profession, who were very unwell and actually didn't recognise it themselves that they were unwell. Their stress level had taken them to a very... The model of the Canmore Trust is about safe spaces, and that safe space for me might be a different safe space from you. So the safe space might be within your head, but the safe space might be within your clinic or in your practice or in your university lecture room or your dissection room or wherever it might be. So wherever you are challenged by stress and brokenness, you might want to consider how you would develop, augment a safe space within you or without you. And so this whole wellbeing thing is about asking us to reflect as a profession on how we use the events of COVID-19 and lockdown and all that's happened in that, not to just say, how do we double down and do it again, but how do we think about who we are individually, as individuals, but as professional people, and also in the role that we have within the profession, whether that's a DF2 or it's a practice owner or whatever it might be. How do I stop and just reflect on where I'm at and make sure that my own well-being, my team's well-being is at the forefront of this decision-making process? And so that's what this Canmore Trust Dental Wellbeing event is about on the 4th of November, Friday the 4th of November in Glasgow. Mike Gow has been the one who's taken forward all the administration for it. So we hope to see as many people as possible.
Yeah, we'll help as much as we can with that. Okay, so at the end of part one, I'll ask the question that we're asking every single person that comes to this, and it's a very poignant question for you. So every person who does the podcast gets asked this question and passes it on to the person who comes next. But I met you when I was 21, okay? And I remember vividly that time and everything that was going on in my life and my excitement and my fears and the challenges and the conversations I had about who I wanted to be as a dentist and all that kind of stuff. And now I'm 29 years further on from that. But what I would ask you is, if you were able to meet very briefly with your 21-year-old self now, what would be the one most important piece of advice that you would give them?
It's a really good question. And of course, it's very poignant for what we've just experienced as a family. And you might make me cry as I answer the question, but the answer is love with all your heart and love everyone in your sphere of influence with all your heart, and make sure that you give lots of hugs around and care for people inside your family, outside your family, in your sphere of reference, in your sphere of influence. Make sure that you leave nothing undone that you really want to do with your life. Hugely important.
Yeah. Okay, that's very good. And what I expected, but that's the starter for everybody else. So they'll not be able to use that. So now they'll have to do something else. John, in terms of recording, I'm going to just say thanks. And I'm going to see you in a few weeks. Okay, I'll be coming back from the Pyrenees. I've been on my bike, but I'll not have done a great deal there for one reason or another. So I'll have a nice little cycling trip. But we'll see you. I'm planning to see you on that Wednesday that we're back, and I'll sort all that out. So thank you for your time. All right.